Thank you very much. A quick note on KFC. I actually remember where I was when I found out about the 11 herbs and spices thing. It was a pretty important meeting, and I screamed and made the meeting stop until I felt like everybody appreciated to the full extent like how brilliant that was. So it was very cool to see you guys talk this morning. It's like one of my favorite campaigns ever is the Kernel rebranding. So keep it up. It's super fun to watch. So my name is Liz. I work for A&W Restaurants. I'm the digital manager, which basically means sort of anything that would go through any sort of online channel typically goes through me or comes from me at some point. So I oversee our consumer-facing website, our internal training website, our email marketing program, our national social strategy, local social strategy, and all of that fun stuff. So for the purposes of today, I really wanted to focus on something that has been a big shift for us, really in the last 12 months. Oh, here we are. We have a really modest budget and a very modest team, and all of our media dollars are something that we have to ask for. So I feel like a big part of my job is making sure that I am showing that the money that I'm getting from our franchisees to spend on national advertising is actually driving people into their restaurants, which is the elusive thing for QSR brands, of course. So a quick agenda. I'm a big list person. I like to know what's happening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about A&W and kind of our very short history with digital media. I'll give you a quick recap of our 2017 media plan, and then go really into what we're doing for this year. So we'll cover our strategy, our tactics, some of our targeting, and then I'll end a little bit with some of the sell-in process. So A&W is actually the nation's oldest franchise restaurant chain. We were founded in 1919. We first developed our national digital strategy in 2014, so not very long ago. Our online advertising up to that point had been really fragmented. We had a couple of agencies who had tried some things. There was a Facebook coupon that went out at one point. We had some local vendors who were doing things in their markets, but it really wasn't a cohesive strategy until 2014. And prior to last year, really our goals were based largely on measuring impressions, social fan growth, growing our email program, web traffic, the very elusive brand awareness. We know that we have very low brand awareness. When I took this job, one of the first things that one of my friends said to me was A&W went out of business years ago. I said, well, I hope not, because I've already quit my other job and I have no backup plan. In the mid-'80s, we had 2,500 restaurants, and we're down to 643. But last year was the first year that we ended with a higher restaurant count than we began with, so we're on an upswing, hopefully. And really, it was the first time in 2017 that we shifted our thinking towards driving measurable in-store traffic. How can I report to a franchisee that the money that we're spending online is physically bringing people into your restaurant? So we have some challenges, as everybody does. We are unable to read real-time sales data. There's about a 4 to 6 week lag in sales, and it is 100% self-reported. So I'm trusting that all of our franchisees are telling us exactly how much they're making on a regular basis. We have limited funds, and typically our concentrated online media flights are only about 4 to 6 weeks. And we try to make those happen during the early spring or summer. A&W is a very seasonal business, and so we try to fish while the fish are biting. We have limited ability to apply learnings. Typically, we have to wait 9 to 12 months to actually apply what we've learned in a campaign to the next one, which can be frustrating, especially when you work in technology, because essentially everything has changed by the time your next campaign comes around. We have really fragmented asset types in our system. The menu offerings and promotional messaging varies. We have what we call our base brand A&Ws, which is what you would think of as a typical drive-in or standalone A&W. We have co-branded restaurants with both A&W and KFC. Pete Harmon's company is actually our largest franchisee that we have in the system right now. And then a few years ago, to make it more complicated for ourselves, we introduced a new concept in Lexington, Kentucky called A&W Burgers Chicken Floats. We have 4 corporate stores now, and it's a little bit of a shift into the better burger market. We're trying fresh meat and all kinds of different toppings and some new products to try and compete with restaurants like Five Guys and Smash Burger and things like that. When we went through the FDA calorie labeling exercise last year to make sure that we knew exactly what we were selling, no exaggeration, we had over 30,000 unique menu items across the country that we have to market. So if you have any ideas, please come find me later, because we are all ears. Our geographic location of our restaurants really varies. We have a lot of restaurants in super small towns. We opened a restaurant in Siren, Wisconsin a few months ago, and that town has 600 permanent people who live there. So a lot of time the digital inventory that we have just doesn't exist. And then we have a franchise community that is really deeply attached to traditional media outlets because they've been doing it for 99 years for the most part. A fun game that I like to play with myself is I think about if I were to write a book about A&W, what would it be called? And I keep a running list of titles. And my current title is You Can Pry My Billboard Budget from My Cold Dead Hands, the A&W story. So it's always fun to hear those things from our franchisees. So in 2017, we ran the bulk of our media during our summer sales event to support our peak season. So this happened in mid-June through the end of July. It was the first time we'd promoted a protein nationally. It was our hand-breaded chicken tenders. Except for our KFC co-branded restaurants, we leave the chicken to them. They're experts at it. We were promoting a Reese's Peanut Butter Shake in those locations instead. And the placement for those asset types included some social promotion, some promoted tweets, display ads using device ID targeting, which is really what the bulk of this is going to be about. We tried some Hulu online TV, some direct placements with the Weather Channel's mobile app, YouTube pre-roll, of course, our Mug Club emails, and then we've got a handful of brand ambassadors or just A&W super fans who love the brand and talk about us online. So in terms of our tactics, it was also the first time that we had really narrowed down our competitor set to target specifically these 6 restaurants. We concentrated on 2 main tactics, awareness, focusing on mediums that allowed for high-impact placements. We had some rich media ads that expanded into maps, showing the user's closest location. We had a lot of really cool sort of 6 to 15-second video spots. And then really the big shift was the second part, which is our engagement tactics. So how can we actually focus on driving traffic not only to the website, which is nice. Technically, we don't sell anything on our website, so it doesn't really make us that much money. What does make us money is when we can actually get people to go into the restaurants and buy whatever we're promoting, hopefully for full price. So both of those tactics together really worked to bring attention to our summer promo and hopefully created a desire to visit a restaurant to purchase. So what happened? I'm a big numbers person. We don't have a lot of data, but we do have some. So some of the things that we had discovered was that we drove traffic to our specific location pages on awrestaurants.com by almost 40%. Traffic from mobile users increased by 88%. That seems high. I hope that there was a big increase because we didn't do any desktop advertising, so it would have been really weird if that would have shifted that way. On average, people were spending 73% more time with our ads, and that was attributable to the rich media that we had. We had a fun little ad that would show up where you could scroll through all of our dipping sauces, really designed to have people spend time with our products and get that logo recognition. We gained 4,500 new social fans, almost 30,000 new email Mug Club members, which was awesome, and added 8 new brand ambassadors to our roster. So it was a very big summer for A&W. So some of our key takeaways. This was for all of the campaigns that we did, device ID, social, email marketing. We got over 24 million impressions, 2.7 million video views. And for our brand, these are really large numbers. We saw a 14.1 positive lift in users' likelihood to favor A&W after being exposed to an ad, which is great. And then using device ID targeting, we were actually able to attribute over 50,000 incremental store visits to our device ID targeting and exposure to our mobile ads. And so that last point is really what I'm going to spend the rest of this session talking about. It is full of what I like to call marketing math because I have some numbers, but I don't have all of them. And we'll go through the assumptions here in a minute. So once again, it was really the biggest shift from awareness tactics. You know, brand awareness is great, having an affinity for the brand is great, but that doesn't really translate directly into dollars. So how can we actually prove that we are changing behavior, driving people into restaurants, and having them buy our product? So we started out with 3 forms of audience targeting. This is not unique to us, I know. But we began with behavioral targeting based on people's interests and current proximity to an A&W. So for most of the country, we did either a 5 to 10 mile radius within our restaurants. There's some states, Wyoming, Montana, there's no people within 5 to 10 miles of our restaurants, so we expanded up to 30 miles. Retargeting, using people who had previously been to an A&W and who were close proximity to a restaurant as our audience. And then custom audience targeting, which is really what the system learned as we did our campaign buy. Specific groups of users that we developed who had really been responding to our ads the most. So you can see here, for our behavioral targeting, it was people who were casual diners within 10 miles of our restaurants. People who loved fast food is a big fit for us. Families who were traveling for the summer, where A&Ws are located, oftentimes we're a destination for people. I was talking to somebody yesterday who had been to our Smithfield, Rhode Island location, which is an original car hop. It still has a drive-in, you flash your lights for service. It's kind of an experience, and we have about 50 of those restaurants left that people like to travel to. And then people who were looking for good deals. So for retargeting, we were looking at lapsed users who had been to an A&W, but not recently. We wanted to remind them why they loved the brand and really have them try some of our new products and hopefully kind of break that buy cycle and get them coming back to A&W. So they had visited sometime that year, but not in the past 3 days, and they were currently close to an A&W restaurant. And then the custom audience targeting, of course, is what we learned as our ad campaign went on. We were able to get very specific. It was still lapsed users, and this is where we did our competitor conquesting. So people seen it at Chick-fil-A, KFC, Culver's, Wendy's, Dairy Queen, and we actually ended up throwing Arby's into the mix as well because the data was telling us that A&W customers were most often seen it at Arby's, which I initially thought was strange, but Arby's is kind of an old company. They've been around for a long time. They have a lot of unique menu offerings, and so it ended up making a lot of sense. So what did we learn? Obviously, the custom audience drove the most traffic. Do-it-yourself enthusiasts, fast food diners, and big box shoppers were among the top exposed visitor profiles. And 62% of these people actually lived within 10 miles of an A&W. So these were lapsed users who were physically close to our restaurants most of the time, who for whatever reason had just stopped coming. KFC, Dairy Queen, Chick-fil-A, and Arby's were the competitors where our exposed visitors were seen the most frequently. And then the very cool thing that we came up with, based on some facts and some marketing math, was by using this data and applying some predictive methodologies, we're actually able to attribute 50,700 incremental store visits to A&W locations, resulting in a $1.91 cost per visit, which is pretty good. So how did we come up with that? We were counting anything as an incremental visit if we had changed behavior. So we partnered with a company who had started tracking people's smartphones in about October. So by the time we launched the campaign in June, we had about 30 million pieces of data from just watching our customers go to A&W, live around A&W, go to competitors. So we had all of that data to work with. So if somebody had visited an A&W once a month for the past 2 years, and during the campaign they still came once a month, we did not count that as an incremental lift because we didn't change their behavior. If that same person now was coming twice a month or 3 times a month, we counted that as an incremental visit. So how do we do that? We did establish some baseline patterns. We were able to measure against months of location data for devices while the campaign was not running. This accounted for seasonality in some of our restaurants. If there were bus stops right by the restaurant, you saw a pop of activity every once in a while. It also weeded out things like employees, managers, vendors, people who were there very frequently. And then we identified an identical control group that we ran after the campaign had finished who were not exposed to the ads. So these people have not seen our ads, were not part of the campaign, have the same behavioral demographics as the people we targeted. What was their behavior like? And we were able to see, fortunately, that there was a shift when we were advertising to these people. So that's how we got our incremental lift based on actual visits for both the control and exposed audience groups. Does this make sense so far? It was very fascinating. I loved it as an advertiser. As a human being, it's like super creepy, but it's good to be able to take advantage of it. So at the same time that we were running our device ID campaign, we also had other advertising going on. We had some social campaigns happening. We had franchisees who were doing TV in their market. Not a lot, but there were a few. And so in order to get an idea of the full DMA population around our restaurants and how those people were acting, we had to make some assumptions that if you'd seen an A&W ad and you had the same behavioral attributes as the people that we were measuring, you probably behaved in the same way. So we then took that, multiplied that into the full DMA population to get total projected restaurant visits. So this is where it starts getting a little bit more interesting, and there's also a lot more numbers involved. So over the device ID campaign, this was just for the smartphones that we were targeting. This doesn't account any of the social traffic or email traffic we were getting. We had over 14 million impressions, 1.3 exposed unique users. We used 186,000 of those to calculate incremental lift. Total exposed visits was 101,000, but of those, 50,705 were actually consumers whose behavior we had changed. So that sounds great, and how did it translate into dollars is always the next question. So I originally had what we actually spent up here, and then I got embarrassed and I took it out. So it's high 5 figures, I'll tell you if you come and find me. But we were able to use that divided by the 50,705 incremental visits, and through the magic of math, that ends up being $1.91 cost per visit. So that's great. That's another data point that we can work with. That's a pretty low number. We had calculated $2.25 is what we were estimating, so we came in under, which was great. So here's where it gets a little bit more tricky, but still, we like to work with the data points that we have and do as much as we can with them. So assuming an $8 check average, because we can't read real-time sales data based on some anecdotal data and some franchisee sampling that we did, we came up with $8, was about our check average across the country. For our 3-piece chicken tenders, the food and paper cost on that was $1.35. And I did not factor in any labor costs because it got really complicated. So that was a big asterisk that we had on there. But if you take that $8, you subtract the $1.91 that it costs to get them in the door, you subtract your food cost at $1.35, you are looking at 50,705 times $6.09, and we ended up with 2.5 times our investment. So we went from a high 5-figure investment to a mid 6-figure result. I'm not great at math, but that is a definite shift. And that was something that when we compared to our sales, and we divided our restaurants into buckets. We divided them into restaurants that had gotten less than 50 visits, 50 to 100 visits, 100 to 150 visits, and then so on in increments of 50. And we were able to see that for the period that we were running our promotion, for the restaurants who got at least 50 visits, it was the best period that they'd had all year. So that's good. Now we have a couple of different data points. We know how much we're spending. We know anecdotally how much is coming into the restaurant. And then we look at the numbers that we can actually see, and everything was lining up. So check, 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 which was good. There were definitely some problems with this campaign. One of them that we did not think was going to have as big of an impact as it did is with our co-brand locations, we have no idea what they bought when they went into the restaurant. If they went into a KFC A&W, they may have bought buckets of chicken and no root beer. If they went into a Long John Silver's A&W, they may just have bought fish, so that doesn't count for us. So that was a big problem for us. That affects about 60% of our system, so it's not insignificant. And the other thing that we had found was that there were a very select few restaurants that this worked really, really well for. So we had about 45 restaurants that had at least doubled their investment or more. But we had about 300 restaurants that barely broke even with what they had put into the campaign. So we took all of those learnings, and then going into 2018, we'll be doing this in April, and really the #1 focus of what we're doing online this year is to drive that measurable foot traffic. We had some good results last year. It was a test. We weren't sure how it was going to work out. But once you've gone from thinking that brand awareness is enough to actually measuring foot traffic, you really can't go back the other way. So this will likely be our focus for the next few years. We're using that visit data from 2017 to make ad investment more equitable between restaurants. So the way that our ad model works out is we actually ask our franchisees to invest their own money in some of our national media campaigns. So we never like to ask people to invest knowing that they're not going to get what they are paying for. And so we have developed some other methodologies that we think will account for that. It's not a perfect science, but we're going to try it out. And our #1 goal, of course, is to help increase same-store sales. So secondary goals, as always, we want to increase brand awareness. We want to increase our social following. We want to increase our email list. But really the #1 thing is we want to drive measurable in-store traffic. So some of our changes in strategy, we are segmenting our restaurant lists to differentiate between the asset types. So not only are we looking at our base brand A&Ws, the ones that stand alone and aren't co-branded with another restaurant, we're looking at them as urban, rural, and then off-highway. There's a big difference in that restaurant in Siren, Wisconsin versus one that's in Green Bay versus one that's in Sacramento. So we tried to profile all of our restaurants to make sure that we were putting them in the right category, which would determine some of the media that we're placing. We're dividing our campaign into 2 flights for the first time because it got really, really hard to wait 10 to 12 months in between campaigns. So we're actually running our first campaign April through May and then taking those learnings and running a second flight in June. And we're using different creative messages and different calls to action to really determine what drives the most foot traffic for the lowest cost. Always that's the plan. So you can see here, this is how we broke out our restaurants. Urban, metro, small town, rural, and then transient commuter. We did a lot of Wikipedia-ing, along with purchasing some data on the demographics. And we're also going to test different calls to action based on those segmentations. So does it make a difference if you're in an off-highway location and we say, get one for the road, or make a pit stop, small kind of semantic changes like that. And then the ad model is set to learn and optimize towards these different audiences as the campaign progresses. So hopefully by the end of our first flight, we'll have a really good idea of exactly the kind of people who are responding to these ads. So changes for 2018 also. I couldn't help myself and I had to do a little bit more math just so I had something to work with. So using the data from last year's campaign, we not only segmented those restaurants into those 3 buckets, but we also used the cost of the campaign and the profit made to determine how many visits each restaurant would need to get in order to break even and at least make their investment back. So through the magic of marketing math, we determined that last year, if we use those same learnings and assume the same behavior changes, we're spending a little bit more this year, which is always exciting. Each restaurant basically needs to have 26 visits needed to break even. So that's another metric to work off of. We can keep an eye on those restaurants, see how they're progressing throughout the campaign, and if we see that those restaurants who are really not performing as well as we would like them to, we can think about supplementing that media. We're guessing that it's probably going to be the restaurants that are in really small towns where there's just not enough digital inventory to go through. So if we kind of track those restaurants as the campaign progresses and see that they've got maybe 2 or 3 digital visits, but that's all, do we do a print drop for them? Do they look at more traditional media? Do they get their billboard budget back? Really whatever it might be. So any questions on this that we've done so far? Yes, sir.
One of the opportunities I see you did a fantastic job in, getting it to the point of that first initial visit. Mm-hmm. What are the metrics on return visits, and what does that mean for the lifetime purchase of that people as a result of the campaign?
That is a fantastic question. We do not have the answer to that yet. Part of our second campaign that we're doing this year is going to be retargeting actual visitors with signups for our loyalty program. And then what we'll hopefully be able to do next year is even further segment those groups and actually advertise local deals to those particular people. So get them in the door with the branding and the product, and then get them coming back in because they're getting money off. So this just kind of outlines what our tactics are for 2018. We divided it up into 3 buckets. Basically May, we're running a very similar campaign based on the learnings that we had last year. June, we're going to pause and really determine what worked and what didn't. Are there restaurants that need a little bit of extra TLC? Are there restaurants that saw thousands of visits during that time? Because if they did, they're going to get a phone call from me that says, hey, we need the rest of your money because this worked really well for you. Our content strategy for this year, we're starting with 2 messages. We have a new burger coming out, which is delicious. If you're a burger lover, I highly recommend it. It is our extra cheddar diner burger. It's got 3 pieces of Wisconsin extra sharp white cheddar. So good. And then we're also running our root beer floats for $1.99. So this will be the first time that we're doing a price-pointed message online, which is exciting for us. And once the higher performing product has been determined, we're going to shift the rest of our money towards whatever that is. So it'll be another test for us to see protein versus one of our sweets and treats items, although we do have that extra added factor of one is price pointed and one is not. So it's not a perfect A/B test. And then once we figure out what our product is going to be, we're really playing around with those CTAs. If we drive people to their closest location, is that enough? Does it make a difference if we say you're 5 miles away versus 15 minutes away? versus some of the location-based CTAs that we've been using in the past. Some creative examples that we have. I only picked out 4. You know, if you're a digital advertiser, you have 5,000 different sizes for everything, it seems. So there are definitely some pros and cons of this methodology, and it is risky for us to basically go all in on this for 2018. So I just lined up some of the pros and cons that we had from last year and going into this year. I won't read them all to you. I'm just a very list-oriented person. I like when everything is laid out this way. So this year, we're dividing our restaurants into segments. Once again, we'll be optimizing towards the higher performing product. We won't be optimizing towards the highest performing restaurants this year. Like we said, it wasn't really fair last year that we had a small handful of restaurants that did awesome, and then some restaurants that got little to no visits at all from this type of campaign. We also had to wait a really long time for reporting. So we ran this campaign last year in June, and it was almost October before I had gotten data back from the company. And at that point, nobody cared anymore. They didn't even remember what we had sold that summer, let alone if it had worked or not. So we couldn't see that cost per visit until the post-campaign report. We had no weekly reports, no monthly reports. It was basically wait and see. Sales seemed to be improving, but 4 months was a really long time to wait to be able to analyze some of those metrics. So our budget was set only by targeting type last year, behavioral, retargeting, and location-based. This year, we have segmented our restaurant lists to make it more custom for each of them. We're doing unique audiences for those segments. Like I had mentioned, we have the off-highway, so we'll be looking at doing placements in different travel apps and the weather app. And we have the ability to optimize by creative asset this year, which is new from last year as well. So I know I am just about out of time, but based on some conversations that I'd had, I thought this might be helpful not only for some of the smaller brands in the room, but also for agencies. I feel like 80% of what I do is just telling people what's out there and how it works and what's available. So one of the things that I've actually had our board members do is a mini media audit, because I had gotten the response that digital media did not work in their area. They never saw any. They'd never heard of it before. It wasn't a real thing. And so I started asking them really how digital advertising affected them in their everyday life. What ads do you see, and how do they relate to you? Have your purchasing habits been influenced? And then has your brand affinity changed? And then because I love icons, I made a little life cycle and talked about all the different ways that me, as Liz, is exposed to digital media from the time I wake up in the morning, my commute, going to work, listening to podcasts, watching TV, making dinner, all of those different touch points that we had an ability to do a customer intercept. So breaking it down even by day part, I wake up, I have a smart alarm clock. I listen to podcasts on the way to work. I wear my Fitbit religiously. I've got 2 Amazon Echoes, which is totally unnecessary. I have one for upstairs and one for downstairs for no reason. I listen to podcasts on the way to work. I use Waze every single day. So I just started taking screenshots of this is what I'm seeing at different points during the day, and this is how it relates to me. So when it rains in Lexington, we see a bunch of tire ads, which makes perfect sense. I'm obsessed with looking at furniture and never buying it, which I'm sure Joybird really appreciates. I was out of Tide Pods, so I got served an ad on Amazon. And then, of course, I passed like 4 Starbuckses on my way to work, and I'm a frequent purchaser. And then looking at work, I'm always thinking about food. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm checking the weather obsessively, even though nothing exciting ever happens in Kentucky. I'm checking social. I'm checking email. I'm getting ready for a meeting. And these are all of the different ads that I see during those times of day, and I'm able to back up why I'm seeing these. Amazon Prime, I'm a member. I'm not a member of Metro PCS. They're trying to convert me. I'm super into Kraft macaroni and cheese. It's what I call one of my shame foods. Purchase it quite frequently. So I'm checking the weather obsessively. I see that ad. There's a new pizza place that opened up in Lexington. I'm always looking at restaurant websites online, and I go out to eat way more often than I should. So I would recommend if you're trying to explain to somebody who doesn't think that digital media has an impact on their life at all, just make them do this and wait while they actually go through the exercise, because we found that it's made a big difference. So that is all that I have. Any questions?
Liz, thank you very much. We have time. We have a few minutes for questions. Anybody? I wanted to ask a little bit about the media plan. Mm-hmm. So using device IDs, are you finding particular platforms that you're working with working better and worse now that you know what your CPIV is? Do you plan on investing differently in terms of the specific media that you're going to be using?
The Weather Channel performed really, really well for us, really across the country. We tried a platform-specific buy with Hulu last year, and I didn't really talk about it very much because it didn't work for us. There was a super high cost per impression, basically, and it was a lot harder for us to actually track that to a restaurant visit. So for us, with the device ID targeting, it was mostly through apps, and we found that the Weather Channel, Gas Buddy, and then Pandora were the three that across the board had performed very well for us.
So you were using standard apps as opposed to using buying
Correct.
social? Okay. Mobile web at all?
Next
But basically,
step.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that'll be the
Basically
next
apps.
step for us.
And what I know that you touched on playing around with the creative, but were you finding that do you have early insights about what creative was working? I mean, did you need to use a specific call to action, or was branding working? Do you have a sense of how many impressions were necessary before you were changing behavior?
We were able to see about 2 weeks into the campaign last year that our hand-breaded chicken tender branding was way outperforming our sweets and treats. It was like 10-to-1 driving people into restaurants. We did not do any dynamic calls to action last year, so that'll be new for us this year. But it was the first time that we'd advertised a protein, and that way outperformed any of our floats or our shakes that we had done before.
And you weren't doing discounts or couponing or anything like that?
Full price.
Yeah. Liz is going to be here the rest of the day if you have more questions for her. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was great.